It all started on an ordinary Monday morning, one of those dull beginnings to a week filled with endless deadlines and stale coffee. I was walking into the conference room, balancing my laptop, a notepad, and my sanity, when I saw him, James. He wasn't extraordinary in the usual sense. Brown hair, slightly disheveled like he'd just gotten out of bed, a face that held a quiet confidence, and the kind of eyes that made you forget what you were supposed to say. But the moment our eyes met, I froze. It wasn't the usual awkward pause of meeting someone new. It was deeper than that, almost like recognition. "Hi, I'm James," he said, extending a hand with a polite but warm smile. "Sophia," I replied, shaking his hand. And as soon as our fingers touched, a strange warmth coursed through me. Not the type you'd expect from a handshake, but something I couldn't explain, like a memory resurfacing, though I had no idea why. I brushed it off, blaming it on lack of caffeine, and we got on with the meeting. But throughout the day, I kept catching myself stealing glances at him. It wasn't attraction, not exactly. It was curiosity, a need to understand why he felt so familiar. That night, I dreamed of him, not in any coherent way, but in fragments. I saw a dimly lit street, rain pooling on cobblestones, and James, dressed in clothes from another century. I woke up with a start, my heart racing. I'd never had dreams like this before, let alone one so vivid. And the strangest part, I felt an overwhelming sense of longing when I woke up, like I was missing something, or someone. The next few days didn't help. James and I worked closely on the project, and every interaction felt like déjà vu. I'd know what he was going to say before he said it. When he laughed, it was as if I'd heard it 1,000 times before. It was unsettling, but also comforting. One evening, after we wrapped up a particularly long meeting, I found myself walking out with him. The sunset bathed the street in gold as we stood by the entrance, and he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. "You ever feel like you've been somewhere before even when you know you haven't?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence. I froze. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged, his hands in his pockets. "I don't know. Ever since I met you, I've had this strange feeling, like I've known you forever." I stared at him, my throat dry. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. It wasn't just him. I'd been feeling the same thing. The dreams, the memories that weren't mine, they all pointed to him. But how could I explain that without sounding crazy? "Maybe we've crossed paths before," I said finally, forcing a smile. "Maybe," he replied, though his tone suggested he didn't quite believe it either. As I walked home that night, my mind raced. Who was James? Why did he feel so familiar? And what were these flashes of another time, another place, that seemed to tie us together? I didn't have answers, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a coincidence. Whatever was happening, it was only the beginning. Weeks passed, but the strange connection between James and me only deepened. Every interaction felt heavier, like there were invisible strings pulling us closer, binding us to something neither of us could name. And the dreams. Oh, the dreams. They came almost every night now. They weren't just fragments anymore. They were vivid, like scenes from a movie. I saw James standing in the middle of a grand ballroom, his hand reaching out for mine. We were dancing under a chandelier, surrounded by people dressed in gowns and suits from the early 1900s. There was laughter, music, and a feeling of pure, unfiltered happiness. But then, just as suddenly, the scene would shift. Darkness, rain, a sudden goodbye. The dream would end with James walking away, leaving me behind. I started avoiding him. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't trust myself around him anymore. How could I explain to him that I was dreaming about a life that wasn't mine, a life that felt like it belonged to us? But fate, as always, had other plans. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon when I found myself at my parents' house, helping my mom sort through some old family belongings. She was organizing a pile of dusty photo albums and letters that had been tucked away in the attic for decades. I wasn't particularly interested until my eyes landed on a small, faded photograph lying among the clutter. It was black and white, worn around the edges, but the image was clear. A woman, dressed in a long gown, stood next to a man in an old-fashioned suit. They were smiling, but there was something hauntingly familiar about their expressions. My heart stopped as I realized why. The man in the photo looked exactly like James. I stared at the picture, my hands trembling. "Mom, who is this?" I asked, holding it up. She glanced over and smiled nostalgically. "Oh, that's your great-grandmother, Eleanor, and her fiancé, Thomas. They were engaged, but he died in an accident before they could marry. Tragic, really." The air seemed to leave the room. My great-grandmother, a fiancé named Thomas, a love story cut short, and James, he was the spitting image of the man in the photo. It couldn't be a coincidence. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the photo. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I typed out a text to James. "Can we meet? I have something to show you." We met at a small cafe near my apartment. I slid the photo across the table, watching his face as he picked it up. His reaction was immediate, his brow furrowed, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's my great-grandmother," I said, "and her fiancé, Thomas. But James, this is you. How is this possible?" He leaned back in his chair, staring at the photo like it held the answers to the universe. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I've been having these dreams, Sophia. Dreams of another time, another place, and you're always there." My breath caught. "You've been dreaming about me?" He nodded, his gaze meeting mine. "It's like I know you. Like I've always known you. But I don't understand how." Neither of us spoke for a long time. The rain pattered softly against the cafe windows, a strange comfort in the silence. Finally, I broke it. "I think we've met before," I said, my voice trembling. "Not in this life, but in another. I think we're connected, James. Somehow." He didn't laugh or call me crazy. Instead, he reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "Then, maybe we're here to finish what we started." His words sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just déjà vu. It wasn't just coincidence. It was something far greater, something neither of us could fully comprehend. And in that moment, I knew I had a choice to make. Whether to embrace this connection, this love that spanned lifetimes, or to walk away and leave the past behind. But as I looked into his eyes, I realized I'd already made my decision. This wasn't just a second chance. It was our chance, and I wasn't going to let it slip away.